දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයිෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වලකයි.
Despite hesitation by Sri Lankan authorities initially to reach out to the International Monetary Fund, given the worsening economic situation in the country, the global lender turned out to be the only solution to the crisis that later transformed into a political crisis as well. After official approval was granted by the Cabinet of Ministers on the 15th of March to reach out to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout package, Sri Lankan authorities have held several discussions with the IMF, both in person and virtually. Today, a staff team of the International Monetary Fund arrived in Sri Lanka with hopes of reaching a staff-level agreement on the country's request for a bailout package. The final phase discussions between the visiting delegation of the IMF, led by Peter Brewer, Chief of the Debt Capital Markets Division of the Monetary and Capital Market Department, and Masahiro Nozaki, Senior Economist of IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department, and Sri Lankan authorities began immediately after their arrival. Talks kicked off at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka this morning with the participation of the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, IMF Resident Representative Tubagas Feridhanu Setyuan, and Finance Secretary Mahinda Sirivardhana. Meanwhile, the visiting IMF delegation called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe this evening to discuss the state of the Sri Lankan economy. The President's media division said that during the meeting with the President, the IMF staff decided to hold another round of discussions on Friday with the central bank officials to iron out technical issues pertaining to the EFF arrangement. Staff from the global lender will be in Colombo until the 31st of August. Sri Lanka first reached out to the IMF and held official discussions regarding the need for emergency funding, when then Finance Minister Ali Sabri attended the 2022 IMF and World Bank spring meetings from the 18th to the 22nd of April. The then Finance Minister Ali Sabri made the request to Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. Following this, the IMF-led technical assistance team held virtual discussions with Sri Lankan authorities starting from the 9th of May on an economic program that could be supported by an IMF lending arrangement. The discussions concluded on the 24th of May. Then, on the 20th of June, an IMF delegation led by its Chief of the Debt Capital Markets Division, Monetary and Capital Market Department Peter Brewer, and Senior Economist of its Fiscal Affairs Department, Masahiro Nozaki, arrived in Sri Lanka for bailout talks with Sri Lankan authorities. Their first in-person talks on the facility under discussion. Upon conclusion on their 10-plus day visit, IMF's Peter Brewer and Masahiro Nozaki termed their work in Sri Lanka as constructive and productive, adding that the staff team and Sri Lankan authorities made significant progress on defining a macroeconomic and structural policy package. The IMF delegation said Sri Lankan authorities had made considerable progress in formulating the economic reform program and that the IMF is looking forward to continuing dialogue with Sri Lanka. However, Sri Lanka still has to negotiate with creditors after announcing a preemptive default on all outstanding debt totaling $51 billion in April 2022. As an emergency measure, pending full discussions with the International Monetary Fund. But since Sri Lanka reached out to the IMF, it has continued to maintain that Sri Lanka's public debt was assessed unsustainable and that it requires sufficient assurance of restoring debt sustainability during the restructuring process. Nevertheless, the country awaits a prospective receipt of $3 billion in bailout arrangement from the International Monetary Fund, which is expected to bring in much relief to the country's forex shortage. Approval by the IMF Executive Board of the Extended Fund Facility Program would require adequate assurances by Sri Lanka's creditors that debt sustainability will be restored.